My mother called me 40 minutes before the ceremony. I was sitting in the bridal suite of a garden venue in Charleston, in a white dress that had taken 8 months to alter, with my best friend pinning the last flower into my hair. The bridal suite was on the second floor of an old plantation-style house, with tall windows and a chandelier that had been hanging there since 1952. Sunlight was coming through the windows in long, warm slants. There was a tray of small sandwiches on the side table that nobody had touched. My phone was on the vanity in front of me, screen down, the way I had been keeping it for an hour, because I did not want to know who was calling and who was not. It buzzed. I picked it up because I thought she was telling me she had arrived. She was not. She was telling me that she and my father had decided that morning that they were not going to walk me down the aisle unless I signed a paper transferring my entire savings account to my brother before the ceremony. $73,000. She said it like she was reading from a list. She said my father had drawn up the document. She said it was waiting in their car. She said all I had to do was come outside, sign it, and they would walk in and take their seats and walk me down the aisle like nothing had happened. I did not say anything for about 10 seconds. My best friend Jules was watching my face. She had stopped pinning. The bobby pin in her hand was halfway to my head and frozen there. Outside the window, the string quartet was warming up in the garden. I could hear them tuning. I could hear the faint laughter of guests arriving. The world was about to be a wedding, and my mother was on the phone trying to turn it into a transaction. "Mom," I finally said, "it's my wedding day." "Caroline," my mother said, "your brother needs that money. He has an opportunity. He cannot wait. We have been over this. You are choosing today, this moment, to be selfish about it. You can save your wedding by doing the right thing right now, or you can walk down that aisle alone and ruin the day yourself. We are giving you the choice. We are being fair. My name is Caroline Whitfield. People who know me call me Carrie. I am 28 years old. I am a wedding photographer. I have been photographing other people's weddings for 6 years, which means I have stood at the back of more chapels than I can count, watching brides walk down aisles on the arms of fathers who were proud to be there. I know what those moments look like through a camera. I know how they feel from 20 feet away. I have framed them in golden light and saved them on hard drives for couples who would still be married 20 years later. And on my own wedding day, my own mother was on the phone, telling me that the price of my father's arm was $73,000. I had spent 8 years saving to start my own studio. I told her no. I am going to tell you exactly what I said, what I did, and what happened at my reception that night that ended with both of my parents on their knees on a marble dance floor in front of 200 people. But before I do, hit subscribe. And tell me one thing in the comments. Tell me the name of the person who showed up for you on a day they did not have to. Just their first name, or who they were to you. The cousin, the neighbor, the boss, the friend's mother. I want to know who showed up. I read every single comment. Now let me take you back to the bridal suite. I told my mother I was not signing anything. I told her if she and my father wanted to walk me down the aisle, they were welcome at the venue in 20 minutes. I told her if they did not want to walk me down the aisle, that was also their choice, and I would walk down it on my own. I told her I was getting married either way. I told her I loved her, which was true, and I always tried to tell her the true things even when she was being terrible. I hung up. My best friend Jules put the bobby pin back in my hair without speaking. She finished the last flower. She handed me my bouquet. She said, "Carrie, what do you want to do?" "I want to get married," I said. "Okay," she said. "Then let's get you married." I want to back up and tell you about my brother Jared, because he matters to this story even though he was not in the room. Jared is 2 years older than me. He has been a musician since he was 14. He has been almost a successful musician for the last 12 years. There is a category of person in this world who is always almost something, and Jared is the platonic example of it. He is almost about to get a record deal. He is almost about to play a major venue. He is almost about to release his next album. He has never quite made it, but every 6 months there is a new opportunity that requires money he does not have, and every 6 months for the last 12 years, my parents have given him that money. Sometimes they have given him my money in advance, by promising him things they had not yet asked me for permission to give. My parents bankrolled Jared into his 30s. They paid for his recording sessions, his demo tapes, his apartments in Nashville and Austin, and the year he spent in Berlin. They bought him guitars and amplifiers and a van that he later sold without telling them. They told everyone in our family that Jared was on the verge of a breakthrough, the way they had been telling everyone for over a decade. They believed it. They needed to believe it. They had spent so much money on his almost career that admitting it was not going to happen would have meant admitting they had wasted 12 years of their financial life on a story that was never going to be true. The $73,000 in my savings account was supposed to be the seed money for my own photography studio. I had been saving it since I was 20, working as a second shooter for other photographers, then as a lead shooter for a busy studio downtown. I lived in a small apartment. I drove a used car. I cut every corner I could cut. The studio was not a vague dream. I had a business plan. I had a location scouted. I had 3 potential clients who had told me they would book with me on day 1. The studio was the next thing in my life. It was the room I was going to walk into after I was married. My fiancé Matteo had known about it for the entire 2 years we had been together. He had been so proud of me for saving every dollar of it himself. My parents had decided, 3 weeks before my wedding, that the studio money should go to Jared instead. They had asked me about it once, at a family lunch. My mother had said, sweetly, that Jared had a really exciting opportunity, and she had been thinking that since the wedding was such a big expense, and Matteo's family was paying for so much of it, maybe I would consider helping Jared with my savings. After all, my mother had said, you can always rebuild your savings. Jared cannot rebuild this opportunity. I had told her no, gently. I had told her I had worked very hard for that money. I had told her the studio was the next thing in my life. I had told her I loved her, and I loved Jared, but the answer was no. My mother had said okay. She had smiled. She had not mentioned it again. I had assumed the conversation was over. It was not over. They had been planning. They had been waiting. They had decided that the most leverage they would ever have over me was the morning of my own wedding, when I was already in my dress, with 200 people in folding chairs in a garden, expecting them to walk in. They had timed it on purpose. They had wanted the maximum amount of pressure on the maximum vulnerable day of my life. That phone call had not been emotional. That phone call had been strategic. They had thought about it. They had picked the moment. I want you to understand what kind of love that is. It is not the kind that exists. It is the kind that wears the costume of the kind that exists. It is a costume my parents had been wearing for so long that I had stopped being able to tell the difference, until that morning, when the costume slipped, and I saw what was actually underneath it. What was underneath it was a transaction. I had been a transaction my whole life, and I had not realized it. I walked out of the bridal suite at 3 minutes to 6. I walked through a hallway lined with hydrangeas. The string quartet was already playing. The ceremony was about to start. I stood at the door of the garden, with Jules behind me holding my train, and I looked out at the chairs. My parents' chairs were empty. Matteo was standing under a small white arch covered in jasmine. His parents were already seated. His father, Esteban, was a small, quiet man with gray hair, who had been a pediatrician for 40 years. His mother, Lucia, was a former English teacher who had cried the first time she met me because she said I had kind eyes. Matteo had 2 younger sisters. They were sitting next to his parents in matching blue dresses. There were 2 empty chairs reserved in the front row on my side of the aisle. They stayed empty. The wedding planner, a woman named Bay who had handled 300 weddings in her career, came up next to me. She had her headset on. She looked at me. She said, "Carrie, your parents are not here. Your brother is not here. What do you want to do?" "I want to walk down the aisle by myself," I said. She nodded. She was not surprised. She had done 300 weddings. She had seen everything. "Do you want me to make an announcement?" "No." "Do you want me to ask anybody to walk you down?" "No." "Just you." "Just me." She pressed a button on her headset. She told the quartet to switch to the bridal march. The music changed. Jules adjusted my train one last time. She kissed my cheek. She walked ahead of me up the aisle, the way she was supposed to as the maid of honor. I took a breath. I started walking. I want to tell you what happened in the next 90 seconds, because I have thought about it almost every day since. I have looked at my own wedding photos 100 times and tried to find the seam, the moment, the exact frame where everything in my life turned over. I have not been able to find it, because there was no single moment. There was a slow building of one. I walked alone for about 10 feet. The aisle was long. There were 200 people watching me. The air smelled like jasmine and wet grass. The string quartet was playing. The early evening light was that golden Charleston light that wedding photographers chase for an entire career. I could feel the empty chairs on my side of the aisle in the corner of my eye, like two missing teeth in a row of guests. I kept my eyes on Mateo. He was watching me. He was crying. I had only seen Mateo cry twice before. He was crying the way men cry when something is too big to fit inside them. About a third of the way down the aisle, I saw movement to my left. My grandmother, Mimi, my mother's mother, who was 84 years old and had not approved of what my parents had done since the lunch where they had first asked me, stood up out of her chair. She was using a cane. She stood up slowly. She was wearing a pale blue suit. She did not say anything. She just stood up. The man next to her, a friend of Mateo's family I had only met twice, looked at her, and then he stood up too. Then the woman next to him stood up. Then a couple I had photographed 3 years earlier, who I had become friends with, stood up. Then Jules's mother, who had been my second mom since I was 15, stood up. Then a row of people I knew from the wedding industry, photographers and florists and a calligrapher, all stood up at once. By the time I was halfway down the aisle, half the guests on my side were standing. I do not know exactly how it happened. I do not know who started it. My grandmother says it was her, but my grandmother has been telling slightly exaggerated versions of her own life since I was small, so I'm not sure. What I know is that nobody had planned it. Nobody had organized it. It just happened. People kept standing up, one by one, in a slow wave, until by the time I was 3/4 of the way down the aisle, every single person on my side of the garden was on their feet, watching me walk, and they were not going to sit down until I got to Mateo. I was crying by then. Not the pretty kind of crying that brides do in movies. The other kind. The kind where your face crumples and you cannot stop it and you do not care because the people who love you are standing for you and the only thing left to do is walk the rest of the way and let them. I got to Mateo. He was full crying by then too. He took my hand. He whispered something to me that I am not going to share because some things should stay between two people. The officiant gave the guests a moment to sit back down. They sat down. We got married. I do not remember most of the ceremony. I remember the reading Lucia did. I remember the way Mateo's hands shook when he put on my ring. I remember the kiss. I remember walking back up the aisle with my husband, looking at the same people who had stood for me, and feeling, maybe for the first time in my whole life, like I had a family. Just not the one I had grown up thinking I had. I want to tell you about the reception, because that is where the story turns. We had 200 guests at the reception. It was held in a ballroom behind the garden, with white tablecloths and crepe myrtle branches in the centerpieces and a marble dance floor in the middle that the venue had been famous for since the 1920s. We did the first dance. We did the parent dances. Mateo danced with Lucia. I danced with my grandfather, who is Mimi's husband and who had also stood for me, on the strength of his wife standing. Around 8:30, the side door of the ballroom opened, and my parents walked in. I want you to understand, nobody had invited them at that point. They had not paid for anything. They had not earned a chair. They walked in like they had decided, somewhere between the phone call at 5:20 and the start of the reception, that they were going to come anyway. As if showing up late to the reception, they had skipped the ceremony of would somehow undo what they had done. As if the photographs would still include them, if they could just slide into the room before the cake. Jared was with them. Jared was wearing a gray suit. He looked tired and slightly drunk. I was at the head table when they came in. Mateo was next to me. His parents were on his other side. Mateo's father, Esteban, saw them first. He stood up. I want to tell you about Esteban. He had been the kind of father-in-law I had been quietly afraid I would never have. He was small and quiet and watched everything. He had asked me, at our first dinner together, what I loved about my work. Not what I did, what I loved. Nobody had ever asked me that before. He had listened to my answer for almost an hour. He had asked follow-up questions. He had remembered the answers 6 months later. He was the person I had wanted my own father to be. And on the day I had given up hoping my own father would be that, I had married a man whose father already was. Esteban looked at my parents across the ballroom. He looked at me. He said, very quietly, "Carrie, may I?" I did not know what he was asking. I said yes anyway. He walked across the ballroom. He met my parents in the corner near the door. He stood in front of them, with his hands clasped at his waist. He spoke to them quietly for about 10 minutes. I could not hear what he said. Nobody in the room could hear what he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not use his hands. He simply spoke. I watched my parents' faces while he was speaking. My mother's face went from confused to defensive to something more complicated. My father's face went from blank to ashen. Jared kept looking around the room, checking who was watching, checking whether other guests were noticing. Other guests were noticing. About 8 minutes in, my mother started crying. Not strategic crying. The other kind. The kind I had never seen on her face in my entire life. About 9 minutes in, my father's knees buckled. He did not faint. He just folded. He went down to the marble floor, slowly, the way an old building goes down when the demolition is precise. He put his hands on the marble. He stayed on his hands and knees. My mother went down next to him. She had her hands over her face. Jared stood there next to them, the way he had always stood, slightly behind, slightly above, never participating. The room went quiet. 200 people were watching. I want to tell you what I learned later that Esteban had said. He told me 3 days afterward, when I asked him. He said he had told my parents one thing only. He had told them that they had made a mistake on this day that no apology could undo. He had told them that he had watched me walk down the aisle alone, and that he had watched 200 people stand for a young woman they were not even related to, because that young woman had become important to them. He had told them that they had given up the right to that moment by their own choice that morning, and that nothing they did for the rest of their lives would buy that moment back. He had told them that they had 2 children, and had spent 30 years investing in the wrong one, and that today was the day the bill had come due. He had told them, very gently, that they were not going to be allowed to be in the wedding photos. He had told them they were not going to be allowed to spend the rest of the night watching their daughter dance with a family that knew how to love her, when they had not bothered to learn. He had told them to go home. He had said one more thing. He told me about it last, and quietly, because I think he was not sure if he should have said it. He had told my parents, looking my mother in the eye, that he had a daughter of his own, and that if anybody had ever made his daughter walk down an aisle alone, the way they had made me walk down an aisle alone, he would have spent the rest of his life wishing he had been a different father. He had told my mother that she was at the start of that wish right now, whether she knew it or not, and that the rest of her life was going to be lived inside it. Esteban told me later that he had not meant for my father to fall to his knees. He had not been trying to humiliate him. He had only been telling the truth, and my father, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, had heard the truth and not been able to stand under the weight of it. My parents stayed on the dance floor for about a minute after Esteban walked back to our table. My mother was crying. My father did not get up. Jared, eventually, helped them both to their feet. The 3 of them walked out the side door of the ballroom. The door closed behind them. The DJ, who had been holding the music, started a song again. People slowly went back to their tables. The reception kept going. I did not chase them. I did not run after them. I sat at the head table next to my husband, and I watched the door close, and I felt many things at once. What I felt most was something I had not expected. I felt grief, not for the night. The night had already given me everything I needed. I felt grief for the parents I had imagined I had, who had never actually existed. I felt grief for the version of my mother who would have been at the venue in time, who would have helped me with my hair. I felt grief for the version of my father who would have walked me down the aisle and then sat down and cried at the way Mateo looked at me. I had been carrying those imaginary parents around for 28 years, hoping the real ones would catch up to them. They had not been going to. They had used the morning of my wedding to make that absolutely clear. The grief I felt at the head table, watching the door close, was the grief of finally putting the imaginary parents down. I cried for about 30 seconds. Mateo held my hand. Lucia, on his other side, leaned over and said, "Mija, we are here. We are here. We have always been here. Look at us." I looked at her. I looked at Esteban. I looked at the room full of people, most of whom were standing up again, this time to dance, in a circle around the floor. I went and danced. I want to tell you what happened in the days after, because I think that part matters too. My parents called me on the morning of my honeymoon. I did not pick up. They left a voicemail. The voicemail was an apology, but it was the apology of two people who had not yet figured out what they were apologizing for. They were sorry the day had been ruined. They were sorry there had been a misunderstanding. They were sorry I had been so upset. They did not say they were sorry they had asked. They did not say they were sorry they had skipped the ceremony. They did not say they were sorry they had built our entire family on a transaction with their daughter. They had not gotten there yet. They might never get there. I did not call them back. I have not called them back since. It has been a year and a half. They send me birthday cards. The cards are signed Mom and Dad. The cards do not contain apologies, only photographs of birds my mother has been seeing in her yard, because my mother has decided to start bird watching, which is the kind of hobby people pick up when they are desperate to be redeemed without doing the work of redemption. I look at the birds. I do not write back. Jared moved to Los Angeles 4 months after the wedding. He is still almost about to make it. I see his Instagram sometimes. I am told by a cousin that he tells people I am the sister who abandoned the family. I do not correct it. He has been telling stories about himself for 30 years, and most of them have been close to the truth without being the truth, and now there is one about me too. It is not my job to manage what he tells strangers about a sister he never bothered to know. I opened the photography studio 9 months after the wedding. The first client I shot in the new space was Jules. Not for a wedding, just a portrait session. Because she had pinned the last flower in my hair on the worst and best morning of my life, and I wanted her face to be the first thing the studio walls had on them. Mateo and I bought a small house. Esteban and Lucia come for dinner most Sunday nights. Esteban has taught me how to garden. He shows up with seedlings he has grown in his own yard, and he plants them in mine. And he tells me stories about Mexico when he was a boy. He has never asked me about my parents. He has never told me what to do about them. He treats my decision to keep distance the way he treats most things, with quiet respect for the fact that other people get to choose their own lives. Mimi died this past spring. She was my real mother in every way that ever mattered. She was 85. I was at her bedside when she went. Her last words to me were, "Caroline, you walked down that aisle by yourself, and the whole world stood up. Don't forget that. Whenever you doubt who you are, remember which way that room moved." I am not going to forget. Here is what I want to tell you, because I think you may need it. The family you are born into is a draft. It is the first version. It is not the final version. The final version is the one that shows up on your worst days. The final version is the one that stands when you walk past them. The final version is the one that does not need you to sign anything in the back of a car to prove your worth. You do not have to publish the draft. You are allowed to leave the draft in a desk drawer somewhere and start writing the real thing. Some of us start writing it earlier than others. Some of us do not start until our wedding day, when it becomes very clear, in front of 200 people, who we are actually getting married into. The empty chair where your parents should have been is not a wound. It is information. It tells you, very precisely, who they are willing to be and who they are not. Most of us spend our whole lives hoping the empty chair will eventually be filled. We make excuses for the people who keep choosing not to fill it. We tell ourselves they did not understand the assignment, or they were busy, or they were having a hard week, or they meant to. They did not mean to. The chair has been empty for a long time, in most of our lives, and the day we finally see the chair for what it is, we have a choice to make. We can keep waiting for the chair to be filled. Or we can look around the room and notice all the other people who have shown up to stand for us, in their own quiet ways, for our entire lives. Look around your room. There is somebody standing for you right now, and you may not have noticed. Notice them. Walk down whatever aisle you are walking down toward them, and not toward the chair that has been empty since the day you needed it. I want to ask you something before I go. I asked you at the start of this video to tell me the name of the person who showed up for you on a day they did not have to. I want to ask you something more specific now. Tell me, in the comments, the moment you realized that person was your real family, not your blood family, your real one. Tell me what they did. Tell me where you were. Tell me how old you were. The moment you knew. Some of us are still waiting to have that moment. Some of us have already had it. Some of us are going to have it next week, and we do not know yet. Tell me about yours, so the people who are waiting can read it and know what to look for. I will be reading every comment. I will see you in the next one.